This is the Lunch Bunch with Andrew Hawthorne and Company on VOCM. For the next half hour, we will peek behind the big stories we are all talking about today. The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station. Now, your host of the Lunch Bunch, Andrew Hawthorne.
Welcome to the Lunch Bunch. It is Wednesday. I think it's Wednesday. Here we are, and we're still doing some New Year's resolution stuff. We've been talking loosely about that all week. And my guest today brought in some pretty awesome stats about it. Of course, you all know and love Dr. Janine Hubbard. How are you today?
I'm grand. How about yourself?
I'm doing swell. We're having a great time. Do you make New Year's resolutions yourself?
I always have good intentions about them,
Yeah.
but I'll be honest, never quite move towards them. I have other ways, I think, during my life and during the year that I work towards behavior change.
Yeah. I think specific stuff. New Year's. There's so much pressure on New Year's resolutions.
Yep.
It's a little weird. What my wife started doing last year, and we've been thinking about a lot, is putting intentions out. Just general kind of the theme of this year is. So the theme of this year is creativity, or it is friendship. I'm going to hang out with my friends more often, or it's whatever. You know what I mean? But not specifically like. I am definitely going to lose 20 pounds right now. And you know.
Which sounds great, but unfortunately actually tends to lead to lack of success because the more vague and more general your goals are, they're really hard to quantify. So therefore, it's really hard to actually make those changes.
It is.
But it sounds great.
You brought in some awesome New Year's resolution stats.
Go for them.
That 50% of the population make New Year's resolutions, and the average person makes the same resolution 10 years in a row. The same one.
The same one, or the same general category, for sure.
You got to be looking at yourself at year 7 and thinking, really?
But that's also because what you see is the 80% of us abandon those within the first 6 weeks. And because we engage in all or nothing thinking, you're like, I'm a month in, that didn't work. I guess I'll try again next January.
It's kind of blitzkrieg, right?
Yep.
And yeah, I find that Valentine's Day especially, or any festival, kind of is putting spikes on the road in front of your tires, because you're like, well, I've been eating really healthy, I've been exercising, now Christmas is coming, and I'm going to eat a lot of turkey and not have time to do anything but festival.
Yep.
So I guess I'm just off my diet.
I'll give it off. And I had a really good plan for New Year's resolutions, and guess what? Storm chips. Storm chips.
Yeah,
or you get the flu this time of year, and all of those good plans, all of those good intentions, they go out the window.
Now, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, and a lot of the stuff that's on here, the top resolutions including weight loss, exercise, stop smoking, better money, debt management. Oh, there's one. But a lot of these are very physical oriented. And what we were going to talk... Oh, go ahead.
Doesn't suit Newfoundland in January.
No. What are you going to do?
In most ways. That's the worst time of the year for good fresh fruits and veggies. It's the worst time of the year. A lot of the time for getting outside, although hopefully people got lots of good cardiovascular exercise and fresh air this week.
Lifting with their knees. Yeah, there's not a lot of time even for outdoor sports in the winter, especially around St. John's. It's not like we can go skiing a lot at this time of the winter. We want the snow to be okay, and a lot of it's slushy, and we're still kind of waiting for that level of winter.
Well, you're waiting for that peak window of good usable snow, which West Coast does very well, Central does very well, St. John's.
Corner Brook's been laughing at us for 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Easily. Yeah. But the snow we got this week was really nice, like snowman snow.
It was, until it all gets destroyed tonight. And so take advantage this afternoon. Go out take your lunch break at 1:00 and go out and enjoy some of that snow.
All right, you heard it here first, employers. Everybody wants to build a snowman. Soundtrack to Frozen is optional. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're talking about New Year's resolutions, particularly of the mental variety, with Dr. Janine Hubbard. Stay tuned.
Now back to Andrew Hawthorne and the Lunch Bunch on VOCM.
We're back. We're talking about New Year's resolutions, particularly of the post-physical realm. Is that how psychologists refer to this? With Dr. Janine Hubbard. We're talking about the mind, and particularly kind of changing, your bad feelings, your habits. This is a very dark period. This is a very, it seems like, New Year's resolutions is a thing, so that's why we do it. But this seems like a rough time to try to add any positivity to your life.
It really can be. For a lot of people, this can be a real down time of year because you've gotten through all the excitement of the holidays. Now you're being faced with the reality of the financial stress.
Oh, no.
And for a lot of people, there's been excess over the holidays, whether that's food or alcohol or even just socializing and spending.
Yeah.
So everybody's feeling, forgive the pun, but a little hungover right now. And a little, I think the weather this week for a lot of us hit the, oh, right, we're stuck with winter from now until like June.
We are.
Well, but it does. And it gives that kind of feeling of desperation and hopelessness. And it's dark when you get up in the morning and it's dark when you're going home at night. And there's a lot of people for whom this is a really tough time of year, particularly for a lot of folks. They are able to, if they've got some underlying mental health condition, they can sometimes hold it together through Christmas. And then they just kind of collapse, like every bit of mental energy that they had. It's like, okay, no, I'm spent now. And it's figuring out, how am I going to pace myself? How am I going to get through the winter? How can I set some goals? How can I figure out ways to forgive the cliche, but bring some joy into my life over the next few months? What are some things that I can do to look forward to?
How do you get into that headspace when it's dark by 4:00, and how do you really kind of change that mental habit to add that positivity coming in hot to the new year?
It really depends on who you are and what works for you. For some people, it's making a point of going out at lunchtime for a few minutes, even if it's just to go, oh, look, the sun exists.
There it is, folks.
There it is, folks. This is a really good time of year for a lot of people. If you do struggle with some of these issues, one of the blue therapy lamps, we've got really good research supporting them. They've come down considerably in price. You can get one for about $60.
What is that? What's a blue therapy lamp?
What it does is it actually helps with what we used to call seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. It got renamed a couple of years ago. It's now depressive disorder with seasonal patterns, which isn't nearly as catchy.
This is so depressing to me. The fact that this depressive disorder has been renamed is depressing.
I know.
I want to say I have SAD.
I know. Well, the
SAD.
thing is, we know that about 2 to 6% of the population actually has a fairly severe form of it that may require medication and or therapy over the winter. But the estimates are somewhere between, they suggest about 15% of us, but some estimates are up to about 30% of us suffer from some of the mild symptoms. And that is things like just that desire to cocoon, that increased craving for carbohydrates, that lack of interest in going out and enjoying activities.
I do have these things.
We all have them to a certain extent. It's just a question of, what and how much do they interfere?
Are they prohibitive in your life?
Yeah,
Yes.
well, that's always the threshold that we look at, is kind of at what stage do things affect. And some of the theory behind this disorder is that it does have to do with basically the amount of light absorption we're getting. And it affects things like serotonin and melatonin, which are kind of parts of our brain, that are not parts of our brain, are things in our brain that help regulate mood and help regulate sleep. So using something like a blue light for about 20 minutes in the morning is felt to help stimulate some of that vitamin D exposure to us. We don't know exactly how it works, but we're seeing some pretty good studies saying, listen, if this is something you're struggling from, this is a really relatively inexpensive and like no negative side effect device to give a try to.
That's a great idea, too, because vitamin D comes from sunlight.
It does.
Yeah, and I've heard several times that Newfoundlanders, every single one of us,
We are chronically
deficient
deprived. Yep.
in vitamin D for that reason. And if you've ever looked at our sky, which is usually white,
Yep.
you know why. So maybe this is a good thing to check out, get a little more of that D going on.
Yeah, and also, and I mean, we joke about it because a lot of us do suffer from some mild symptoms, but I always do like to stress, like I say, the stats show 2 to 6% of people actually have a fairly severe form of it. And if you are someone who you know that this happens to you every year, you hit the winter, these feelings hit full force, along with all the other symptoms of depression, and then you see it lift in the spring, it's worth having a chat with your GP. We sometimes find, like I say, a combination of medication and or some psychotherapy can really be of benefit because it can be quite disabling to some people.
So these are pretty manageable then.
They are very manageable if you get help and you're proactive about it.
Okay, great. That's the problem.
It's a problem for most of us about most things.
Oh, man, being proactive. All right, we're going to take another quick break. When we get back, we're talking about mental resolutions, changing your outlook, and trying not to have a sad at this time of year. Please stay tuned.
Now back to Andrew Hawthorne and the Lunch Bunch on VOCM.
Keep an eye on that.
We're back. We're talking to Dr. Janine Hubbard about New Year's resolutions and mental stuff. We were talking about cutting toxic people out of their life, which is ironic considering what's coming up. But
yes.
You know, a lot of people make this resolution. I saw it a lot on Facebook and Twitter, people resolving and people making fun of the people to resolve to do this. Cutting toxic people, toxic influences out of your life. What does that mean? And is that a thing we can do?
Well, and here's the thing. Like a lot of the stuff we talk about, that follows a full continuum from someone who really and truly is an abusive influence in your life who needs to be removed from your life to somebody who's a bit more of an annoyance or gets on your nerves or aggravates you. Or perhaps you actually don't have any face-to-face conversations, but they post stuff on Facebook that irritates you or goes against your values. Like it can be that full continuum.
Which is fine. You can just mute that person.
Well, that's just it.
Everybody should stay off of Twitter substantially more than they do.
Absolutely.
You know?
So yeah, I mean, there's a whole range. For sure, listen, it's a new year. Maybe use this as the opportunity to look at some of your social media contacts. And if there are some people who you just find what they're posting or what they're sharing really isn't helpful to you or is distressing to you. Listen, there are also lots of ways that you can mute them without unfriending them and without offending people, but just so that that's not something that's a constant factor in your life. But the bigger picture is more in terms of whether it's friends, whether it's family members, whether it's colleagues with whom, I mean, we've used this term toxic relationship, but really what you want to look at is, do you have people in your life that are draining you? That it's far more of a one-sided relationship, that their needs are always being met, but they're doing it at a personal cost to you. And there isn't a reciprocity, because friendship, let's face it, not every day, all the time, but friendship is supposed to kind of be a reciprocal relationship where, yes, sometimes I might be much more needy and needing some emotional or, support, but hopefully that's being returned at another point in time.
Right. Yeah, it's one thing, it's difficult to extricate yourself from a really bad friendship that's hurting you, but sometimes that's family members too, people that you have to see, people that even if you don't see regularly, you're probably going to see at a family gathering.
Absolutely. And it's figuring out how to work through it. And one of the things I was reading, and there's not a ton of research on this, but one of the things that I was looking at was, because we've become this much more instant gratification, kind of quickly disposable society, there's a concern that people are doing that with friendships as well. And like I said, we're not talking about full-on abusive relationships. That's a whole different category. But one of the things that we're not really trained for, it's funny, we are raised societally to be able to cope with the end of a romantic relationship or, how that disappears. But we do not get good training on what happens when you have just either moved on in life from a long-term friend who perhaps hasn't realized the same thing. Like, we don't talk about how to break up, and I'm using quotes, with friends.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's because you've moved to a different place in your life, whether it's maybe you have stopped smoking or you have stopped drinking or you have, changed some of your life priorities. How you can maintain a relationship without getting sucked back into kind of that world or that lifestyle is really challenging.
It is. And, the most high-profile example of that I can think of recently is Sean McCann, who, was struggling with alcoholism and depression. And he found that his lifestyle, not because of his friends, but a lifestyle that involved his friends and band members working at Great Big Sea, created this party atmosphere that he felt so much pressure to continue. habits like alcoholism that were very toxic.
And so it is looking at yourself and remembering that we do need to put our needs first. But how do you listen? None of us are good at confrontation, especially around things like friendship, around things like relationship. Being able to say, hey, you know what? Some of the stuff that has been happening lately is making me feel uncomfortable. Or I value the relationship that we've had for the last 20 odd years, but I think I'm in a different space right now. How do you have that conversation without having people get really defensive and really upset? And the big caveat that I would have, because I know we may get cut off shortly. So one of the big take-home messages I wanted for today is if you are looking around and you are seeing that you have multiple quote unquote toxic relationships, you may need to do some inward thinking and some reflection.
Maybe some choices that you've made need revisiting.
Whether it's choices or maybe you need to be looking at your own actions and behaviors and figuring, is it the people around me, or actually is it something about the way either I'm acting or I'm interpreting the actions of my friends? That's a really good time to maybe talk that through with a therapist. Because if you've got, we all have one or two people in our lives, absolutely. If there's a lot of them, if everybody in your life, or if you look back and you have a pattern of kind of intense relationships and then cutting them off abruptly, like that black and white all or nothing thinking when it comes to friendships, or a lot of perceived slights, things like that, that might be worth a conversation, because that could be reflective of more of an overlying relationship pattern. That could be reflective of personality disorder. That could just be I don't have enough insight into kind of how my actions affect those in my social network, and this is something I can work on.
Yeah, and sometimes your other friends can help you out with this when you have positive and family members, when you have positive influence and trying to do this self-reflection. But if not, there's therapists.
Absolutely, but you also have to be open and willing to ask people in your life about, hey, what's the stuff that I do that drives you nuts?
Yeah.
And take it in the spirit in which it's needed, in which it's being provided.
VOCM presents Open Line. The opinions